And we're live.
Welcome to the Transformational CFO, a forum presented by Williams Marston,
where we will explore innovative strategies that influential CFOs and other finance leaders deploy as they navigate critical transitions and drive transformations in these challenging times. I'm Landon Williams.
I'm John Marston, and we are the co-founders of Williams Marston. Our guest today is Brett Kaplan, Chief Operating Officer of Climb Bio, which develops innovative treatments for immune-mediated diseases. Really appreciate you joining us today, Brett. Brett, welcome. We first met in New York, and we're happy to have you here in Boston. And we're very excited to have you join us on the podcast today, Brett. What we'd like to do is start with your career journey. MD, MBA, CFO, COO, it's an awesome path. How have your unique transitions really shaped your perspective as a leader in the biotech industry?
First of all, thank you. I can't believe, I think it's 8 years now, or close to 8 years that
That's
we've
right.
known each other. This business is about relationships, and certainly this is a good one. So I wouldn't say I had anything planned from the outset. I've been lucky and very fortunate to meet a few good people along the way, but I have kept to a few guiding principles. First of all, I was brought up in a very medical family, so I've always wanted to try and leverage that part, and my first stop happened to be medical school. Trying to stay close to the patient has always been a principle of mine. Second of all, trying to work in environments that are one of respect. Mm-hmm. We can talk about banking later on, but the rest have pretty much followed that rule. And then finally, while I'm not a strong entrepreneur, I've always believed in pushing myself and being stretched and trying new things. So you will see throughout my career, I've really tried different things, but ultimately I've settled on the operating role, which I really enjoy, and it is a culmination of combining each thing. So after medical school, I ended up doing an MBA, trying to learn a bit about business, and then was very fortunate to be employed by Lilly in South Africa, where I had my first opportunity to do business development and landed up selling some antibiotics to one of the pharmaceuticals there. And then fate brought me to the US. Fate happens to be my wife now.
All right.
But I followed her with a hope and a dream, trying new things. And I walked the streets in Cambridge for about 6 months and landed up working at a small biotech and ultimately at Cubis Pharmaceuticals.
Right.
And someone took a bet on me. And it was my first exposure to what a good company looks like. Mm-hmm. Mike, Bonnie, and team really shaped organizational culture, pushed people to work hard. But for me, the challenging part was in a BD role, we never did deals. So my next stop was to try Wall Street.
Right.
I kind of got one thing wrong. I thought sell-side analysts did deals, but it turns out that they just do a lot of research. So while I spent 4 good years at Cowen under Steve Scholar, an amazing guy who taught me a lot about hard work and client service, being a research analyst probably wasn't the greatest thing for me, but it did give me my entree to the street and the buy side. But what was really a passion of mine, was something I was trying to pursue, was banking. Mm-hmm. And a good friend of mine landed up at Evercore, which was then a very small shop. I think it was 300 people.
Wow.
The healthcare team was about 4 of us. I was very fortunate to join that team and cut my teeth doing hardcore finance, deal making, and it was a hard slog. I really learned about what it means to work under pressure, what it means to deliver, but ultimately probably not the arena that I was best suited for many reasons. Mm-hmm. I was fortunately asked to join Prevail Therapeutics. So I took the chance. This was a private company. We did the IPO in 6 months later, and then very fortunate to get acquired by Eli Lilly, and we'll come back to that later too. But then I had to look for my next job and landed up at Chroma Medicine, which was a big idea in the scientific space. Team was very small again, and it was a good opportunity to explore some high science, good investors. But ultimately, I needed to do something else, and I decided to join Climb Bio, which again came to me via a friend I'd known for about 20 years who was on the board and said, "You've got to look at this opportunity." So a few themes, a lot of luck, and some good people who have helped me get to where I am today.
That's terrific. And thinking about, the beginning of this, really stretching yourself, having a lot of respect, obviously, for the patient, just a really great foundation for anybody focusing on this career long term. So as someone who's succeeded in finance without a traditional finance background, how do you leverage your outsider perspective as an advantage?
So look, I think in banking, I learned a lot about corporate finance. It was learning on the job. So while I'm not an accountant and I rely on people who know that side of the business, finance is core to what I do and how I think about my
Sure.
job. But this was, something I learned through 8 years of hard work at Evercore. But I think being pragmatic, understanding the different stakeholders, and working through problems, it just basic, simple stuff enables that kind of leverage, and then just experience over time. It's not all a paper exercise. It always comes down to people and the market and timing.
That's great. I mean, it sounds like relationships have really helped to steer your career, and you've had a lot of great experiences. Moving from CFO to COO is fairly unique. We don't see that a lot amongst our client base. We work with probably 300 to 400 biotechs, and we don't often see that transition. How have those roles been different day to day? Where were you focused as a CFO? Where do you focus as a COO? And which role do you prefer?
When I joined Prevail as a CFO, I was responsible there for finance, for HR, for legal. I had the remit without the broader title.
Mm-hmm.
So, coming from a banking environment, while it's purely finance, you actually have to learn all these other skills kind of along the way. At Chroma, same thing. I didn't have HR under me, but certainly landed up with legal, corporate development, even tech ops, so the whole manufacturing side. So it was very, privileged to have all this different exposure. So by the time I landed up at Climb, I decided that the title probably needs to reflect the responsibility that I have. And it worked out pretty well with the CEO, who is far more focused on doing the medical stuff and making sure that we would develop our product and had the medical side under her. It made sense for me to take the rest of the business, or the G&A side and the corp dev side, and give me the appropriate title.
Yeah, that's great. Well, obviously, there are a lot of different leadership styles, certainly that we see. What are your key leadership philosophies, and which philosophy has had the greatest impact on your success?
Look, I've been exposed to many different leaders, and part of it was to try and learn from each of them. I think ultimately you have to be true to your own personality. Where I come down very strong is respecting people at their core, and then trying to enable them to succeed at where they're best at. So really liberating their skills and pushing them. So I think I'm a good judge and pusher of people. I believe in setting a vision and a strategy, and then allowing them to execute on that by greasing the wheels or freeing their path and making that happen. I've taken a bartender to an executive assistant to now someone who's got a senior HR role. And I think just allowing people like that to explore themselves is just phenomenal. And I hope that everyone who works under me in the finance organization has the aspiration to be a CFO. Right. I would love to see that happen. So really just enabling people to be successful and filling in the gaps in terms of the experience to make it happen.
Have you read any books that have informed your leadership style or your management style? Any that come to mind?
Just finished listening to one. So generally listen to nonfiction and read fiction. Mm-hmm. Just finished John Doerr's book on OKRs, which is really
great book.
Really insightful for me. I think, especially as you've, in your executive roles, thinking about goals and objectives, this book has really made a difference for me in thinking in terms of communication, clarity, objectives, and making sure this transparency comes through. I've read a lot of other books, but this one is most recent and highly impactful on the way I think about day-to-day operations at Climb.
Yeah, that's great. It's something our clients tell us that our most successful clients are constantly reading or listening to books to improve themselves. So that's great. I'm sure our listeners will enjoy that. So you've led the sale of at least one company to big pharma. That's a great experience. What were the biggest challenges you encountered during that process?
When we did banking, we'd say the probability of a deal getting done is either 0 or 100%, right? Mm. So anywhere in between is you never know or 0, right? Probably.
Yeah.
So there are many things that can go wrong in a deal, but the fundamentals need to be there. And this is the key to biotech: is if you've got a drug that is going to make a difference to patients, and you are de-risking that drug in its journey to becoming approved, you have a good chance of creating value ultimately being taken out. At Prevail, we had novel technology in the neurology space. So the fundamental there was we had a drug in patients. Right. Which allowed the strategic to come in and say, this makes sense for us. So, and part of that strategic dialogue was a relationship that Franz Hefty, who was the CSO at the time, had with Dan Skravonsky, who was the CSO at Lilly, over 20 years, they had built a business together that Lilly had actually acquired. So again, people know each other and technology that works enabled the sale. There were bumpy roads. When you get to diligence and the stock options aren't quite tying and this isn't quite working, you've just got to push people to get through, do the work. And ultimately, if the buyer believes in the value of the drug, you'll get there. But it's a painful experience.
Yeah, that's great. It's nice, as you mentioned, part of your objective in your career was to stay close to the patients, and that's something that we see with our biotech clients, that many of them go into biotech to help people, and it's nice to be able to combine a career with something that impacts mankind in that way. So that's great.
To really help fuel that impact, you've raised billions over your career. First of all, do you have an official count or an idea on the back of your mind?
There's probably a number, but in terms of the absolute dollars, it's in the billions on the banking side, and now it's probably in the 500 millions on the company side at this point. Hopefully more. Look, again, it comes down to, do you have a drug?
Yeah.
Do you have a management team that represents the drug or a path forward in a very crystal way?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a story that needs to be told and it needs to be clear.
Mm-hmm.
And then have you built relationships with investors and it's kept them apprised of your story over time? You never know when you're going to raise, but when you do need to raise, they need to be up to speed with your story and ready to go. Having a strong IR strategy, making sure investors are up to speed with your story. And then again, doing the back work to make sure the products or the drug is advancing and you're creating value. Because if you're not executing, as a management team, investors start to lose faith. That's the one thing that you can do is execute. Science doesn't always work out, but as a management team, your responsibility is to deliver value to shareholders by executing.
That's great advice, and truer words have never been spoken. Really thinking about the COO role with Climb Bio and really building upon that. What here specifically are you excited to focus on, and how do you see this really building on that past experience?
Yeah, the Climb is very interesting. What we have to do here is really just deliver on the drug.
Right.
It's a promising drug in the immune-mediated space. It's in phase 1, and we just have 3 programs. We've got to kickstart. We've got to execute. It will take time, but we have a lot of capital. So we have the runway to do great things. It's going to be a bit of a long ride while we do this, but I think we're focused, right? And there are things we can do to try and get investors excited or come into the stock, but ultimately, if this drug works, this is going to be a big product.
Excellent. That's exciting stuff, and it's again a great path, and really again a patient-centric model, and everybody wins. That's great.
The biotech industry has had some headwinds over the last few years for various reasons, interest rates, et cetera. What's your view of how the industry is going to evolve over the next 5 years?
Yeah, look, with new administrations, or the potential for new administrations, there's always volatility in the market. But ultimately, this is a business, at least in the US, of delivering innovation to patients. And as long as we continue to do that, and there are a few key ingredients here, this business will be fine. There may be some consolidation on the big pharma side. There hopefully will be more acquisitions. But the core and the heart of this business is science. For the science to take place, we need a couple of good things. We need funding and we need scientists. Funding is probably most sensitive to interest rate environments. So it's been tough right now for many biotech companies to fund. That being said, there's plenty of capital in the market. There's still new company formation. So I'm still hopeful that new science and promising science will get funded. And then the next part is for us to have promising science come through on the academic side. And the US provides this. So I think if you look at the number of drugs coming out of the US relative to any other country in the world, it doesn't even compare. And this entrepreneurial environment is just critical for our success. So as long as they don't kill the entrepreneurial spirit, we should be okay here.
Brett, in the spirit of delivering innovation, which you had touched on a couple questions ago, technologies like Gen AI are becoming, more and more influential daily. How do you see tools like this and any others shaping the future of biotech and pharma?
Yeah, it's funny, we speak about this often, not so much on the scientific side. And I think there are companies that are looking to improve the probability of success using Gen AI in scientific discoveries. These are complex pathways that will certainly benefit from that part of the business. I think it's going to take a long time. I'm not sure if they're going to be big businesses or small businesses, but as long as if they can enable or improve the probability of success, this is going to help us all. Where we're very focused on is productivity at the workplace. We started using stuff to take meeting notes and summarize our meetings, so everyone can be present at the meeting. They aren't taking notes, and we can distribute the AI generated summary at the end of the day. So we're really trying to leverage on the business side to get more efficient on that part of the business. And these tools are generally available today. So, there's going to be efficiencies in cost of capital. There are going to be fewer people we need on the G&A side, or we're going to have people adding value rather than do menial tasks on the G&A side. So I think this is very exciting. It enables us to be far more virtual and efficient and focus on the drug development side, which is where the value is really created. So today we're pretty excited. We are actually talking about SEC reviews not SEC reviews, but there are increasing litigation on your SEC filings by firms using AI to comb through your disclosures.
Right.
So we're trying to think on the finance, on the accounting and legal side, can we use AI to start to generate our 8Ks, 10Ks, 10Qs, and making sure that we're compliant on that side too. So we won't be at risk for litigation.
Yeah, that's interesting. Anything on the research side? Any tangible acceleration of research from AI in the near term?
I haven't seen it, but there are companies out there. I'm sure Big Pharma is big into exploring these things. It will happen. It has to happen. It just seems very natural for me.
Yeah.
Again, but are they going to be a big part of the value chain or not? That I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, it would seem like just pulling together all the data from all the other firms and starting to, compile and identify trends, but not necessarily specific to any one biotech.
So when you think who's best positioned to do that, it's the FDA right there, because they're in the non-competitive part of that business cycle. And it seems to me they are the ones who should really be utilizing AI if they're not already to take advantage, because they see everything.
Right.
We are competitors with many people, so you kind of want to make sure you're not exposing yourself. But if there's a way on a non-blinded way to aggregate data and get smarter, it could be incredible.
I mean, one of the first times we saw that happen, and of course, there's always patient confidentiality concerns, but when COVID happened, some of the insurance companies were analyzing all their data and trying to figure out if there were different outcomes and commonalities of drugs they were already taking or other aspects like, their vitamin D levels or what have you. And you pretty quickly saw some tangible things coming out of that.
You raise a great point. Insurers are another big aggregator of data. Those people who have the advantage of aggregating data definitely can take advantage of. As a small company, your data sets are so small.
Right.
How to figure out how to get ahead of someone else is tricky. It's not going to be impossible. It's just tricky.
Switching over to leadership and team dynamics, Brett, you've worked on and advised various boards over the years. How has that influenced your approach to guiding teams and shaping strategy?
The best thing to manage people is to have clear communication.
Mm-hmm.
As someone told me, managing a board is 99% psychology, 1% finance, right? So I think it goes down to my leadership style. Again, clear communication, objective setting, making sure people understand where you're at and you understand where they're at. And it's the same thing with the board, timely communication, making sure you understand the stakeholders' different touch points. And it's sometimes herding sheep. And there are different tactics. It's often you need to get to each of them separately before you get to a call, a board call, and make sure everyone's aligned. And it just takes a lot of patience and psychology, and hopefully not always does the loudest voice win.
Yeah, we attended a CEO summit recently in the private equity space. And, some of the more successful CEOs had said that if they had to go back to college again, psychology would be their major. And I just think it's so interesting that you said that, because there's been so much debate recently about, the death of liberal arts education. But, it really does influence your success.
It does. Look, in the corporate world, it's a people business. It's getting people to hopefully align around a vision and tow as hard as they can. And then the board needs to be aligned too. Half our time is spent either working with people or working with the board. It is what it is. So hopefully we do a reasonable job at making that happen.
Yeah, the softer skills that so many people overlook. Brett, we work with a lot of controllers, VPs of finance amongst our clients, and many of them aspire to reach the C-suite where you've had a lot of success. Do you have any advice for those up-and-comers and people that are looking to emulate what you've done?
Yeah, I think it's interesting for me to watch controllers or people who have come through the auditing path figure out how to become a CFO, especially in the biotech space. And what I mean by that is often boards and CEOs are looking for externally focused strategic finance people versus pure auditing controller types, I guess.
All different kinds.
All different kinds. But that being said, I think it depends on the blend of the management team. Ultimately, I think there's a big space, and I'm part of a CFO group where actually the people I'm most friendly with are the people who have come through the auditing path, and that they've found themselves amongst management teams who have the external component covered.
Mm-hmm.
And it then are able to just focus on the finance accounting side and ultimately pick up the IR strategic side because that's already a non-core requirement to them.
Mm-hmm.
I think trying to pick up strategic finance along the way is tricky. And I've worked with a couple of really talented VP, senior director, corporate controller types, exposing them at least to the way of thinking around corporate finance is helpful, but ultimately they've got to just be exposed to as much as possible. And the easiest path forward is to join a management team who already has the external stuff that covered, and it's not a critical role for the up and coming CFO.
Yeah. I mean, I would think in biotech where obviously a lot of the focus is on raising money. And then if the trials are successful, you're then usually selling to big pharma. I mean, commercializing and building a sales force is fairly rare. That banking capital markets experience probably is more important in other industries. Maybe it's less so.
As I said, it's a big part of what boards and CEOs look for. But that being said, look, if a CEO is capable at selling the science, or you have a good CSO, and then there is a banker that you can bring in to manage a process, if you have a well-trained accounting CFO type, you have a full team who can cover all the angles. And the more that CFO sees strategic stuff, it will become a second part of them. So. Right. Many of the CFOs that I've worked through, as I said, that I'm friendly with that have come through this path, ultimately have been exposed to these things. Finding the first right company is critical.
Great. Well, thank you, Brett, for everything you've shared with us today. We have one last question. It's a question that we like to ask all of our guests. What's the best advice you've received, either personally or professionally, and who is the person that gave it to you?
Yeah, as I said, I've been very lucky to be exposed to phenomenal people along the way. I think the best advice I can say is treat people with respect and don't be scared to jump to the moon. Like, things will happen.
That's great. Shoot for the stars.
Yeah. Before I go, I think the last thing we didn't cover on is make sure your spouse or your family is as supportive and you're as supportive as them, because they are a big part of making the stuff happen behind the scenes. So, I think it's easy to forget the really important people in our lives. And while this is work, there are other things that are important too.
That's great advice, and
Absolutely.
we should all remind ourselves of that all the time. So you've given us a lot of great advice today. For instance, you talked about relationships, you've talked about communication, and all kind of holding it together. Obviously, is a lot of patient-centric focus and really going above and beyond for that ultimate recipient, of course. So really appreciate you joining us today, Brett. We're big fans and admirers of your work, and we appreciate your sharing your insights and journey with us. Thank you for joining us today on the Transformational CFO podcast, where we explore the evolving role of the CFO and the strategies for a successful path forward.
We look forward to having you join our next podcast as we continue the conversation with inspirational finance leaders.
The views expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect WilliamsMarston's views. It does not constitute accounting, tax, valuation, or other professional advice or services by Williams Marston, and it may not be relied upon for any purpose. This podcast may not be reproduced or republished in whole or in part without the express written consent of Williams Marston.